We're here tonight to celebrate Canada Reads. The theme this year is what is the one book to break barriers? Now it is my great pleasure and privilege to introduce Gregory Ito from the CBC.
Thank you, Yvonne. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight at the Toronto Reference Library for this year's celebration of Canada Reads. You know, it's interesting. I do a lot of these events, and I normally don't get nervous, but I'm actually a little nervous tonight. I can feel my heart pounding a little, and I know it's because I am so invested in these books this year. It is such a strong lineup. I cannot tell you. I have read all 5 of them, and I usually read a couple of the Canada Reads books every year, if not all of them. This year's 5 are amazing. So I am so honored to be with you here tonight. I've done this a couple of times in the past, but this night is very special to me. I am going to be joined by 5 terrific guests, including some of the authors themselves. And we are going to discuss these books and delve into how they reflect this year's theme. And we're really hoping that you'll talk about them too, to your family and friends, in person, via social media like Facebook and Twitter. Now, if you are new to Canada Reads, I better explain how it works. So every year, 5 celebrity panelists choose one book that they think every person in the country should read. And then they duke it out over 4 days of live and also live stream debates in front of a studio audience on CBC Radio and online. That is coming up on March the 16th to the 19th. It's also going to be rebroadcast on CBC television and also our documentary channel. So for the first time, the final list of books today will mix fiction and nonfiction and also include an unprecedented entry from the young adult category. We have a collection of books now that may provoke you to change your point of view or attitude on a wide variety of issues. And if you're here tonight, you're probably a reader who knows that a good book has the power to change a person's perspective. And so we invite you to take on that challenge. Later this month, you can watch and hear the panelists battle it out in what is always a lively debate. And this is going to be overseen by host Wab Canoe. And he certainly knows a good debate because Wab was the man whose choice last year, The Orenda, won Canada Reads 2014. So, to get you ready for all that, we are going to bring you a crash course tonight on all 5 books, and we want all the help we can get because this year's Canada Reads titles reflect a wide range of topics and issues. So let's find out now why you should pick up each of these books. To discuss them tonight, we've got a range of people to shed insight into how each of these books can change your view of the world, each in their own way. All right, so our first book shows us a new way of seeing a group of people, the most long-standing in Canada, the Aboriginals. Their story and how it's been affected and shaped by everyone who's come here since is addressed in Thomas King's nonfiction book. It is called The Inconvenient Indian, a curious account of Native people in North America. It is being defended by lifelong activist Craig Kielburger, best known as co-founder of Free the Children, which he started when he was only 12 years old. He's also an author himself of the Youth Social Action Guide, From Me to We. So no surprise that he would choose a book that gives voice to a chronically misrepresented and often mistreated population of Canadian society, Native people. That voice comes from Cherokee writer Thomas King of Guelph. And it is piercingly sharp and an often funny voice. King uses acerbic humor to outline historical reasons for the long-standing tensions between First Nations and everyone who has come here since. He covers wars, land claims, right up to modern-day pop culture depictions of Aboriginal people on television and in the movies. And he challenges our stereotypes by offering a view from inside the culture. To discuss The Inconvenient Indian, we have invited another Native Canadian to explain whether King's perspective can help break some of the centuries of barriers surrounding Canada's Indigenous people. Hayden King, no relation, I might add, is Potawatomi and Ojibwe from Beausoleil First Nation in Huronia, Ontario. He is a political science scholar and a professor with expertise in Native studies, an advisor to various Aboriginal organizations and institutions, and currently he is director of the Center for Indigenous Governance at Ryerson University. Please welcome Hayden King.
Hi, Mary.
Hi, thank you. Welcome. Thanks for coming here. Let's start, Hayden, with how does Thomas King portray Aboriginal history in North America in this book?
I guess he portrays it in a pretty honest way. I think that he portrays it in an honest way. I mean, I think that he tries to create an accessible and popular account of relationships between Indigenous peoples and Canadians and also Americans. And I want to emphasize honesty, because the book, I think, for many people is the first glimpse into a history that's they haven't heard before, because we're often told these myths and narratives about Indigenous peoples and the relationship generally, and King is able to cut through a lot of those false narratives and really convey an Indigenous perspective, and I would argue a truthful perspective as well.
And what's his argument in the book?
Well, I guess his argument is pretty straightforward, that the relationship has been characterized by inconvenience, right? So Indians have been in the way to Canadians and to Americans, and so the history of the relationship has really been about how Canadians and how Americans can kind of get rid of Indians, either through extermination, through assimilation, through creating narratives of dead Indians or of imaginary Indians that are, noble or savage, trying to essentially just invisibilize and render extinct Native people.
In the book, King covers many Native issues. He goes right back through history. Where do you think he makes his strongest case?
That's a difficult question, because it's such an all-encompassing book. He's looking at history generally. So, you described it pretty well in the beginning. He starts with our common understanding, misrepresentation of Indigenous peoples, which has allowed for policies and legislation that dispossesses and marginalizes Indigenous people. So I guess the strongest aspect of the book for me, or the strongest feature of the book for me, is he lays the foundation for how the relationship has progressed and why it's progressed the way that it has, because of these narratives, because of this misrepresentation.
So Thomas King says it's all about land. Do you agree?
I think that the history of colonization in North America is all about land. Absolutely. I think that I don't think really people, even in the academic world, have been as clear and concise as King. He just boils it down that the discussion is about land. We have assimilation and misrepresentation and civilization policies, all these things, but really at a fundamental level, it has been about land. The conflict between Indigenous peoples and newcomers has been about land, and I think that it's a perfectly apt description of the relationship.
I'm going to bring up a point that you said earlier and just examine that a little. You said that this is an honest account of the history of Native peoples in North America. But at the start of the book, King states that this is a biased account of history and that he draws more on, quote, storytelling techniques than historiography, unquote. So by taking that approach, I'm wondering, do you think he risks the viewer reading this book with, more of a skeptical eye? Now that they know it's biased, now that, is he possibly playing fast and loose with some of the facts?
I think King is probably most well known for saying the truth about stories is that's all we are. History is a story, and it's a story that the story that King tells in The Inconvenient Indian is one that resonates with me. So that's why I find it honest. But I think King is pretty straightforward, and really it's difficult to agree with them. There's no such thing as objectivity. Everything we write, specifically or especially when it comes to history, is always for someone and some purpose. So I think King just gets rid of the pretense. He just.
But would you agree, though, there are some things that are more or less subjective than others?
Sure, there are some things that are more or less subjective than others, and King is giving us his reading of the relationship. And he doesn't provide footnotes, and historians will criticize the rigor of the book. But I'm pretty certain that if you follow up with any of the facts that he provides in the book, you'll find that they're accurate.
And you said that he seems to also reflect what your view is. Is that right? So when you read it, do you feel that this is how I feel? These are the thoughts I have. I'm in agreement with his perspective.
Absolutely. I wouldn't be sitting up here arguing that the Inconvenient Indian should win Canada Reads if I didn't believe so. I think the perspective is, I share the perspective about what the causes of the problem are, the dynamics of the relationship. I think King, validates my own anger and frustration as an Anishinaabe man, and my community's, my family's frustration with the relationship. Because I think anger, sometimes you don't want to be angry. The angry Indian is someone you don't listen to because they're irrational. But King says, why wouldn't you be angry? This is 300 years of a completely villainous, relationship. So he validates that perspective that I have, and that I think that other Native people have, and a lot of what he says about identity issues, mixed blood Native people, and how generally we're invisible to Canadian society because Canadians want to believe, because of the Western, because of popular culture, that Native people, have long black hair with a feather in it and wear buckskin, and so someone like me shows up with blue eyes and like, wait a second, you're not Indian, right? I mean, maybe you're Indian. So, not only in my perspective but also experience, I think King resonates for me.
I'm glad you bring up his anger. Because it also relates to the tone of the book, and he uses a lot of humor. So it's anger, but also seen through his humor. How do you feel about that?
He says in one of the earlier chapters that the salt and pepper of North American Indian history is cynicism and pessimism. And I think that's accurate, and it's probably one of the reasons that people have, picked up a large history of North American Indian relations with Canada, read the first chapter and put it back down. So I think the humor is a way to make the content accessible to people. It keeps them. It continues to. They continue to turn the pages, because he elevates the discussion from cynicism and pessimism to the absurd and the ridiculous, which is really, despite the awful things in the 300 years that we've had this relationship, it's really it's absurd. It's absurd that we have this history. We can't seem to talk about it, and it's still going on. So I think that humor is a way to make that accessible in a way that appeals to many people.
Who do you think this book is for?
I think it's for a broad audience. I think you see its popularity certainly reflects that it's for a broad audience. I think, when I read it, I think primarily that it's for people that know very little about the history of colonization in North America, the relationship between Canadians and Indigenous peoples. I think it's for non-Native people as a kind of introduction to the relationship. But that being said, it resonates with me, and I think that it has a lot of fans among Mushkego and Dene and Anishinaabe audiences as well.
This book, as we said, is a book that is up to break barriers. How do you see this book as breaking barriers?
Well, I think that I'm an academic, and we have volumes, libraries full of academic texts that say similar things, that chronicle the history of the relationship and all these awful things. But King's is a popular text, and since it came, I have not seen a book that makes people uncomfortable as this book does, be as popular. So there's something about it that engages people, keeps them reading, and I think that maybe changes their perspective. And that's a really difficult thing. When we talk about Indigenous and Canadian relationships, the best word to describe those relationships is inertia. We're always stuck in the same track. We can never get out of it. And I think, towards the end of the book, King talks about, the lack of compassion that exists and the lack of empathy that exists. And I think if King is able to connect with people and, break down some of that resistance to engage, then I really think that we could use this, among many other things, as a foundation to build a new relationship. So, education, for people with a conscience, an education can be a powerful thing. And so, creating that empathy would be important.
You say that you see this book as possibly benefiting non-Native people, and you're saying that it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. What about Native people? What about making Native people uncomfortable by reading this book? Is there something of value in that?
When I read the book, I don't remember feeling discomfort, I have to say.
I bring that up because King is not just critical of one side. He's also critical of Native people as well in the book. So I'm wondering whether Native people also need to be shaken up in some way by this book.
Yeah, that's a really difficult question. I think that King, you're right. I think that King, to a degree, does indict, both Canadians, Canadians, Americans, Canadian Indians. But I think, that's a difficult question. I'm struggling to find. This is from an Indigenous perspective. It was difficult for me. I just wanted to cheer for King the whole time. I was saying, flipping the pages and saying, yes, this is accurate. This is true. This is right. And maybe the difference is, and towards the end of the book, King talks about, the problem is the hubris and the arrogance of Western civilization. And so maybe maybe it's time for Native people to be smug, and let non-Native people learn to be a little bit more humble and accept some humility. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I wish we should all be uncomfortable. Change is going to make everybody uncomfortable. It's going to require a lot of discomfort from everybody. So
it's a good answer. Works for me.
Okay,
Thanks so much, Hayden.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's Hayden King, who got our conversation started tonight talking to us about Thomas King's book, The Inconvenient Indian. And novels like our next one help identify similarities and break down the barriers that divide us from them. That's probably why Cameron Bailey, the artistic director of the Toronto International Film Festival, chose to defend the novel Rue by Kim Thuy. Translated by Sheila Fishman, Cameron may be a black man born in England to parents from Barbados and an immigrant who lives in Toronto, yet he found resonance in this story of a young woman from Vietnam who comes to make a life in Montreal. There are many differences in their stories, but this single book overrides that dissonance and finds commonalities. Cameron Bailey was unavailable to talk about Rue, but we decided who better than going right to the source, author Kim Thuy. She's kindly come to join us to talk about her award-winning novel and how her story of people fleeing Saigon and Malaysian refugee camps and who came to Canada speaks to people here and now. Please welcome writer Kim Thuy. Hi, Kim.
I have to lower this.
You're like me.
Yeah.
We're short. Thank
Nothing
you.
like
Welcome.
Mr. Bailey, right?
No.
I would love to look like him, but I'm the exact opposite, I think. He must be very tall.
He's quite tall. Yes,
Yeah.
he is. He'll do a great job defending your book. No worries there.
I think he would be better, but he's not available, so I'll
No,
try to
not
fit
at all.
into his
Not
shoes.
at all. Not everybody has had the pleasure of reading your book yet. So for those who are new to Rue, why don't you tell us what it's about?
It's always the most difficult part, right? But Rue it's about Vietnamese boat people arrived here in the late 70s and early 80s, and Canada had a policy actually to welcome us. Not only Canada, but the international community had this policy to really welcome the boat people. So we were very lucky because we were, of course, in refugee camps after the boat trips and everything, but we had the hope that we would be adopted by a country. And I say adopted because I really felt that I was adopted when I arrived here in Canada, but more specifically in Quebec. And we were sent to a small city where we knew nobody and didn't know how it worked, and we arrived at the end of March. Of course, to us it's already very warm, but not to us, but to Canadians. I'm all confused. Am I Canadians, Vietnamese? But for newcomers, it was terribly cold. And I still remember the hotel where we were just in front of a shopping mall. And we wanted to go to the shopping mall just to visit. And we kept going halfway of the boulevard, and it was so cold we went back. But we were we should have continued and then arrive on the other side, right? We just kept doing that half part many times until April came.
So we're cold too. It's okay. Now, I find it interesting that for a book that is about upheaval, I mean, a lot of it is about upheaval, the title Ru means lullaby in Vietnamese. Why did you give it that title?
I wanted the book to be very light and very quiet. I know that in real life I'm loud and I move a lot and I bump into things, but for the book at least I wanted it to be very silent. And actually I'm saying this, but I had no idea that I was writing a book. I just wrote, and most of it was at red lights, so it was very quiet, because when you're at the red lights, you don't have anything to do, so you just write a book. And,
you're writing while you're driving. Yeah. I don't think we want to know this.
Not while I'm driving, only at red lights.
Oh, just at red lights. All right.
Some red lights are really long, you have enough time to have the whole thought going. And so I didn't know that I was writing, but somehow when I write, the voice is very, very silent, and probably because the stories are quite heavy. If we think about all these boat trips with raping and stealing, when they met pirates, I don't know, I didn't know how to say it in a different way. I needed it to be very, very light. And I don't know if you remember the movie The Joy Luck Club. There was that first scene where you have a feather going through the screen. And I remember as I wrote it, I wanted it to be that light. And the Joy Luck Club, basically that first image guided me through. And maybe because I don't want you to remember the book, nobody remembers lullabies. We always hope that the baby would fall asleep before the end of the song. So I hope that you fall asleep before the end of the paragraph and don't remember what I've talked about. And that it should be just a sensation of it, something very light, almost like a kiss, or just a wind on the skin, and because the subjects themselves are already very, very heavy.
You said that Ru is not really your story. You luckily had quite a good experience coming here. So what is it the story of? Is it representative of many people like yourself who had a wide variety of experiences? I
like to think that it's more than my own story, because we left Vietnam and without many obstacles. Of course, yes, we fled, and it was nighttime, and it was scary, and yes, we were in that small boat, 30 feet by 60 feet, and we were 218 people. So of course, yes, for those 4 days in the boat, it was cramped and we didn't move, and of course you could imagine that we did everything we needed to do as without moving. So the smell, everything was just horrible. But at least we didn't meet any pirates, and there are so many stories. And I think I've always I didn't want to interview all the people I've met, but because we do like Hayden said, it's uncomfortable, so we don't talk about it so much. And I've met many children today who are younger than me, born in Canada, who would come up to me and say, "Oh, they didn't know that their parents had gone through the boat trip, and the book was an excuse for them to start a conversation." And I still remember this woman who came out with her daughter, and as a normal conversation, I asked her, I said, when did you arrive in Canada? Because she was in Shippagan, New Brunswick. And there are not many Vietnamese in Shippagan, New Brunswick, and she spoke with an Acadian accent, like Vietnamese with a Acadian French. And so she said that she left when she was 20 something and met a pirate boat. And apparently the pirates asked all the women to go on their boat, and you can imagine what it was for. And there was one lady who was really scared, and so she hesitated for a long time. And so before she jumped to the boat, she cried so much, and she was shivering and all of that. She missed the other boat, so she fell between the two boats. And apparently the waves moving the boat around or whatever, they cut off her legs. And strangely enough, usually the pirates don't care, right? But this time they rescued her and they asked all the women to come back. And that's how they left they continued the trip and arrived in Malaysia. And but the funny part was they got pushed out again by the Malaysian police, and they got rescued by an Italian ship who got an order from the Pope himself. So they didn't go to a refugee camp. They arrived directly in Italy. So I said, "Why did you leave Italy for Shippagan, New Brunswick?" I don't know, between the two, I cannot see why. And for the wine already, right?
Let me ask you, what is your most powerful memory of coming to Canada, or your experience here in those early days?
Oh, the first image, I would say, because we arrived, again, because we didn't know anybody. So in Quebec, probably everywhere in Canada, but the government would decide where you would go. So they parachuted us in Granby, which is a city about an hour from Montreal, a smaller city. They like to think that it's a big city, but it's a smaller city. And the whole city was there to welcome us. So when we got off that boat, it's amazing because we arrived from a refugee camp. And just before that, a country at war. So you could imagine how dirty and ugly we were. We had infections everywhere and lice in our hair, and yeah, we were just terrible. And but they didn't hesitate at all to take us in physically. And for an Asian person, well, not anymore, but back then it was quite a shock. That was the first cultural shock, to have somebody embracing you physically. And but they did without any hesitation. And I still remember, because after those 4 months in the camp, we didn't have any mirrors, of course, in the camp. There was no electricity, no water. So we forgot what we looked like, right? And the first image that I still remember, when it was in their eyes, and I was so beautiful, and I've never been as beautiful again. And seriously, I like to tell this moment, any opportunity that I have, I want to say it again, because I would see myself in those eyes, and it was such a moment of love. So I fell in love with Quebec, and I fell in love with those people. So I learned French out of love. It was not out of obligation or anything. So that's the most powerful image I had.
What have readers told you about their reaction and what they've gotten out of the story?
It's very different from one country to the other, I would say. In Romania, for example, they would talk to me about the communism, because they lived through the same history page, I would say. They went through the same how would the property, how the government would go in, take away all our properties, and the denunciations and all of that. So when I was invited to Romania, we talked mostly about that. And then when I was invited to Palermo in Italy, it was more about the immigration, because they're having many problems, as you know, in Sicily. with all the refugees coming in. So they invited me over to as an excuse to say that, you know, an immigrant after 30 years, she looks like this, and it's not so bad, you know. And it was the same. Well, and in France, it was more about the language, the structure of the book, how I wrote it. And in Quebec, it's about, or in Canada, it's about the Canadians who have received us. So many of them would come up to me and say, "Oh, you know, we sponsored one family, we took care of that child, or we took care of that family." So it was more about the experience.
The question I'm going to ask you actually relates to your answer about how people react to your story, but what do you think are the obstacles that you hope this book might overcome for people?
I think it's a conversation, like Hayden said. You know, the Boat People page, it still does not exist in Vietnam. And strangely enough, this book is in some 20 countries now, but it is not in Vietnam because there's a publisher, well, there are two or three Vietnamese publishers who are interested in the book, but they asked us if they could take out all the pages where I mentioned boat people. But then the book is so small, you know, that there will be only the cover left. So I said, okay, maybe we should wait a little before we do it. And then here in Canada, strangely enough, internationally, I would say, because you have Vietnamese everywhere, I can go to any country and still find a Vietnamese there. And strangely enough, we're over 1 million all around the globe, and there are not so many books about boat people because it's not in our nature, our mentality to look back. You know, we strangely enough, the Vietnamese, we define ourselves by our present or our future, but rarely from the past. And so not so many of us have written about this story. So I just hope that this book, it could be used as a tool to start a conversation between the different generations, because there are quite many Vietnamese in Vietnam, the younger generations, who have no idea why we left. And the same thing here, where they don't hear about the stories of their parents. And, you know, this woman who I told you about, who said that she was not raped, that all the women were pushed back to the Vietnamese boat. I'm not sure she told me the truth, because her daughter was there. And at the end of the conversation, the daughter asked her, "Why have you never told me this story?" So I think she censored herself. So maybe if I was alone with her, maybe I would have heard more. I've met quite a few Vietnamese through the years, and I think these stories are dying because these people are dying. My parents are in their 70s, so we will lose a page of our history.
Thank you very much, Kim. Thanks for speaking with us tonight. Kim Thuy, ladies and gentlemen. We have looked at books that explore the perspectives of different communities within Canada, Aboriginal and immigrant. Our next two books also delve into two opposing but very familiar experiences. One is about being young and teenage. The other is about growing older. I don't know what you think about when you think about elderly people, but nationally acclaimed musician Martha Wainwright wants to challenge commonly held stereotypes about them by championing a book that paints a thoughtful, emotional, and dramatic picture of old age. The book Martha is defending is called And the Birds Rain Down by Jocelyne Saucier, and it's translated from French by Rhonda Mullins. It is a slim novel, just like Rue. Actually, almost all of them are not that big, this year's books. And it's got gentle and lyrical prose, and it is a fairly quick read. But do not underestimate the power of this book. This book defies assumptions by creating a world of ideas and characters between its pages. The story seems simple. 3 elderly men decide to live out the rest of their lives in the wilds of Ontario, off the grid and on their terms. And also, next door to some pot growers, just to keep things interesting in their golden age. But one summer, 2 women arrive. One is a young photographer who comes to document the fallout of a major event that happened many years ago. The other is an older woman on the run. And soon, love enters the picture and changes everything. Susan is the clinical leader for geriatric outreach teams at South Lake Regional Health Center in Newmarket. She's also the executive for the prevention of elder abuse in York Region. She's worked for 25 years in acute care and did social work in the intensive care unit with people making end-of-life decisions. Susan is someone who sees the realities and experiences of the elderly every day. And she's here to talk about what Jocelyne Saucier's book can help anyone see and understand about growing older. Susan Steeles, welcome. Thank you, Susan. As someone who's had a lot of experience to seniors, and especially people who are facing their mortality, how did this book reflect what you know about our oldest generations?
Thank you. Working with older people for as long as I have worked with them, you really see that people an older generation is really very, very diverse. I worked in the ICU for so long with people making end-of-life decisions, and I met people who were 95, 98 years old, and all they wanted to do was live another day. They weren't ready to go. And then I've worked with people who were the same age or younger, and they'd say things like, I don't understand why I'm still here on this earth, and they don't understand and they want to pack it in. So I think with this book, it really shows different approaches to the end of life. Like, I have to say, I love this book. If you haven't read it, you have to read this book because it shows older people from very many different perspectives. And it doesn't just show an older person from one idea of what it's like to grow old. And really, in my working in geriatrics and working in gerontology, I see all of those different stories. And I was delighted to see that come out in the book.
Was there anything about this book that surprised even you after having worked so many years with the elderly?
I think the book starts off really talking about death. It really, the characters in the book talk very casually about ending their life. So like, if it gets too bad, I'll just do it in. If it gets too cold this winter, we always have that little box of strychnine on the shelf, and we can just carry on, we'll do ourselves in. And so it's a very casual way of approaching death. But then when Marie de Neige is introduced into the story, it really becomes a love story. And I think what surprised me was really how passionately she wrote about these older people. And these are very old people. Like in my practice, they would be old. So 96 years old, 85 years old. So that we don't typically think of old people making love on fur in a cabin, skinny dipping in Northern Ontario. Like, we don't think about that. And she was so bold and so brave to bring forward that story. And so it surprises me because in my world, working with seniors, we can do a complete geriatric assessment and skip sex. We'll look at their feet, we'll ask them about how their bowel movements are, and then when I say to my clinicians, did you ask them if they had sex? They say, oh gosh, I can't ask them that. Well, you ask them about their bowel movements, but you can't ask them about sex. So
okay, so let's talk about sex. Yeah. What is it that we need to know about physical relationships and passion and love among elderly people?
Yeah, I think we have to talk about it, and it's happening. Whether we talk about it or not, it's happening. And one of the things, like in working in healthcare, we know that there's a rise in sexually transmitted infections in older people. They move into retirement homes. They're living alone, and then they move in. All of these people. And they're having sex, and it's not on the intake questionnaire. So I think that's really, that's a barrier that we have to get over, And
even I think, from what I understand, within their own families, even within their own families, their children have often difficulties imagining or just dealing with their parents, seeking relationships.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like they don't see their parents as having intimate relationships with people that weren't their father or weren't their mother, and so it's uncomfortable for people. And so when you ask the children to help you to understand the social history of someone, they don't bring it up. They don't bring it up. So I think that's a huge barrier that this book will bring down. Yeah.
So basically you're saying forget 50 Shades with this book, right? Read this book instead. Far
and which
better.
is really what the really neat thing about this book, I think, it has so many stories weaving through such a small book. You can read this book, and when someone says, "What's the book about?" they go, "All of that in that little book?" And so it's a love story really at its core, but it also really starts to a conversation around death. Who these people choose life. They choose to live, and the choice is theirs. And right now we have such a huge debate around who chooses how we help people make end-of-life decisions or even end their life. And with the characters in this book, they're very clear. They're making these choices for themselves. They're not looking for the government to get involved. If I want to end my life, I've got my friends here, and we've got a plan. So they're not looking, and I think that also is a different side of end-of-life decision-making.
I don't want to give too much away with the book because we do want people to read it, but still on that topic about end-of-life decisions and the way things turn out in the book, what insights do you think it gives people if they have a certain belief about end-of-life? Might it perhaps change attitudes or beliefs about end-of-life, do you think? Is this book capable of doing that?
I really do. I believe that it opens the dialogue. Right now we're very much focused on legislation, and I think it really opens the dialogue to who's in control, who does control who has the power to end your life. And what role do you have? Like, these guys are very self-determined. And so I think it really does broaden that whole conversation. Mm-hmm.
What do you think different generations would get from this book?
Well, I think because it's a love story, it really appeals to all generations. It really does. I think a young person can pick up this book and enjoy it. I think probably more of the middle-aged, older people would relate to the story, but I do think a younger person, any generation, because at its core, really, there's the whole other story of how do you create your legacy? How do you impact the world? And the boy who runs through fire, who is a central character in the book, he didn't mean to create a legacy for himself. He was trying to find the woman the women that he loved, the twins. And so he was really trying.
They were to add further intrigue. There are twins.
There are twins in this book. So he ran through fire to find these twins that he loved so much, And in doing so, he created a mythical character in and of himself in the great fires of the 1920s in northern Ontario. He didn't create that legacy. He didn't intentionally create that legacy. He was driven by finding the women that he loves. But I think it shows that when you follow your heart, and when you become who you are intended to be, then you can change the world. You can really make an impact on other generations. So I think that whole idea of creating a legacy can happen at any age. And I think of some of the older people that I work with in York Region, which is interesting because in York Region you have a very rural population, and you have Greater Toronto Area that is approaching on their home. And so living on acreages, farms, and so there are people knocking on the doors and saying, you know, do you want to sell your house? I'll give you millions and millions of dollars for this house. And they're saying, no, I want to stay right here. I want to die in my house. I want to die with my cats in my house. And I don't care how much money you're going to give me for my farm. And so in doing that, they're changing the world. Because they may not intentionally be changing the world, but they're changing the way we grow, the way our population is distributed, the way we preserve our environment, you know, with the whole green belt. And like they're not out there to protect the environment, but the very decision that very decision that they make is making a huge impact. And maybe, just like the boy who ran through the fire, maybe in 100 years we're going to say, you know, that Mrs. Smith who lived in that farmhouse with those 5 cats, she really did a great thing. And now, you know, we've got water up here, and now we have more than just 100 houses side by side. You know, so that's like creating her legacy without intentionally setting out to do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your insight, Susan. That last novel certainly hopes to break barriers and create empathy around one misunderstood generation. But this next one exposes and explores what many arguably consider the most misunderstood generation, teenagers. The book is called When Everything Feels Like the Movies by Raziel Reed, and this one was breaking barriers right out of the gate. On the one hand, it is a Governor General's award-winning novel for children, yet the first young adult book to join the grown-ups table at Canada Reads. And despite earning acclaim, some petitioners have demanded this book's award be revoked because of what they call offensive content. A lot of attention for a first novel. Even if you've never read a novel for youth before, you would have to be curious about this one. No wonder libraries across the country report record high numbers of holds from patrons who are eager to read it. And Raziel, I can tell you this, my daughter, who goes to Guelph University, not far from here, went looking for your book the other day at bookstores in Guelph. Sold out. So, what is all this fuss about? Well, When Everything Feels Like the Movies has as its star a gay teen named Jude, who is proudly out of the closet, even though homophobia is rampant among the cliques in his school. Nevertheless, this feisty teen maintains a uniquely powerful voice and is convinced that he is destined for fame, or at the very least, notoriety. It's understandable why this colorful character appealed to TV personality and celebrity gossip maven Elaine, or Lainey Louie. She'll be the one trying to convince all of Canada to read When Everything Feels Like the Movies when the debates get underway. Meanwhile, the creator of Jude has a pretty vivid voice and presence of his own, and we figured author Raziel Reed was the best person to do justice to both the character and the controversy created. So we have invited him here tonight to tell about Jude and more. Please welcome the author of When Everything Feels Like the Movies, Raziel Reed. Welcome, Raziel.
Thanks for having me.
Raziel, what inspired this story and the characters?
Well, it was initially inspired by a true story, the hate crime murder of Larry Fodes King, who in 2008 asked a boy in his California high school or junior high to be his Valentine. And the boy, his name is Brandon McInerney, and he brought a gun to school and shot Larry, killing him.
And how much of the book is part of your own life experiences as well?
Well, it started with Larry, and then I drew from my own experiences because I grew up in Manitoba, in Thompson, and in Winnipeg, and I faced quite a bit of homophobic bullying growing up, and the way that I coped with it was by sort of the way Jude imagines that he's a star, or dreams of going after his dreams, like moving to a bigger city and finding himself. And my getaway plan was for New York. So when I was 18, I moved to New York and went to film school. So Jude sort of was inspired by Larry, by my own experiences, and then he just took on his own twisted characteristics.
Yeah, can we talk about that movie theme a little more? Because between the title of the book and also the content, movies and also pop culture, they play a major role. Why did you include them to such a degree?
Well, I think younger generations especially, but maybe everyone, is sort of obsessed with celebrities. And for Jude and his peers, that's what connects them. I think they're all so disconnected. They're sort of living online more than they're living in reality. And celebrity is something that they have in common. And celebrities are Jude's only friends. He has like one girlfriend and his cat and his little brother, and that's it. And he sort of lives vicariously through famous people and has human connections with them.
Well, it's interesting because the last book talked about isolation and withdrawal by the elderly, but there are those characters, and Jude I don't think is the only one in the book too, but they are also experiencing that kind of isolation. Can you talk about that?
About young people's isolation? Well, I mean, teenagers being isolated isn't exactly revolutionary, but I think it's sort of increased nowadays because everyone is living online, and I sort of think like for Jude and his peers, their hearts are only beating when their likers are on Instagram or clicking the heart emoticon and validating them. So the attention has replaced love in their lives.
Talking about tonight, and this is just my personal reflection, but this one strikes me as the riskiest. Riskiest in character, in that Jude seems to walk this fine line. You know, I don't know what that adjective was that you used to describe him. Twisted, yes, okay. Well, often you feel he's that, and you know, he's frustrating, he drives you crazy, you're reading it, you're wondering, why are you doing that? You're just, you know, you've got some death wish going on, and then on the other hand, he's heartbreaking, and he's brilliant, and he's intelligent, and he just, you know, you feel such anguish for him. But again, I say it's a fine line. So, how did you feel when you were creating his character as far as how far to go with him?
Well, I wanted to make him as human as possible, and human beings are imperfect, we're flawed, and that's okay, we're allowed to be, but unfortunately, when it comes to a victim, we can only feel sympathy for someone when they're sort of pure, and that's sort of obvious in how we have in the martyrdom of Matthew Shepard. You know, the night that he died, he was cruising for gay sex, and he was HIV positive. But in stories about his life, we rarely hear that because it's like we want to keep this image intact of who of what a victim is. But you know, we should still be able to sympathize with someone or empathize with someone who has suffered, even if they are imperfect. So, I mean, I wanted Jude to have redeemable qualities, but I just wanted him to be an authentic teenager, and I'm sure anyone who has ever been a teenager or has a teenager in their family knows that they're not always the best people.
You got people agreeing with you there, I think. Now, you yourself were not a teen when you wrote this book, but you write with that voice of a teen. You've got the jargon going, you've got that language. You know, do you think that in itself might be a barrier for older readers who are picking it up for Canada Reads?
Well, I think it's enlightening them maybe to a world that they hadn't experienced before or didn't really understand. I gave a reading at Book Warehouse in Vancouver the other day, and the audience was made up of women who could be my grandmother. And writing the book, I never envisioned that would be my demographic. Yeah, and you know, at the end of the reading, the mic was passed to the audience to ask questions, and a lot of them didn't have a question for me. They just wanted to thank me for showing them a side of life that they didn't know anything about. So it's been really touching.
And what about young readers? What have young readers said to you about the book?
I had one boy in Montreal write that he learned how to be brave through Jude. And I think, if everyone stopped apologizing for being different, then no one would expect us to be sorry. And so that's what Jude gave him. And hopefully he's a friend to them, because I know a lot of young gay kids, or just anyone who's different, feels alone.
And what do you make about this whole, kerfuffle that this novel has stirred? That some people feel that it shouldn't have won the Governor General's Award in the children's category. What do you make of that?
At first I found it kind of amusing. It's just another headline, and there's a lot of Jude in me. I'm all for headlines, but okay. I found it a bit disheartening, because the reaction to Jude in the book has mirrored the reaction to Larry Forbes King during the trial of Brandon McInerney's murder, during the trial of Brandon McInerney, who murdered Larry. The jury sympathized with Brandon, because Larry was half black, he was queer, unabashedly queer, he was different, and Brandon is white, he has blonde hair, he has blue eyes, and so they vilified Larry in the same way that my detractors have vilified Jude. So that part of it was upsetting. But everyone's entitled to an opinion, and I think it's great that people have one. I just wish that the wording of the petition had been a bit different. People have been saying, I think that this book is too graphic for a teen audience. Sign if you agree. That's fine, but the fact that you're taking it a step further and saying strip it of its award and keep it out of the hands of the audience that it was intended for, that's taking away my freedom of expression. And when we lose that, we lose all freedom.
What barriers ultimately do you hope that this book overturns?
I hope it gives people an understanding on what it means to be different. I think this is sort of like the gay book during Canada Reads, but it's more than that. It's about identity, and it's about how we ostracize anyone who doesn't fit into a box. I always say Jude doesn't fit into any box unless it's from Tiffany's. Sorry, I'm not speaking of it.
Thank you, Raziel. This novel is certainly going to give Canada plenty to talk about. Raziel Reid, he's the author of When Everything Feels Like the Movies, and you will hear more about it when TV celebrity commentator Lainey Louie defends it at the upcoming Canada Reads debate. In the meantime, Raziel, thank you for sharing your book with us. All right, there is just one book left to talk about in Canada Reads, and then after this, of course, the countdown is on to the debates with the panelists. To give you a little preview of what that might sound like, we have got one of the celebrity panelists here this evening. And we are lucky to have one who is perfect for following our conversation about When Everything Feels Like the Movies, because this guest would know exactly what that is like. She is regularly in movies and also on television. Actress Kristen Crook got her breakout role on the TV show Edgemont, but perhaps she became best known playing Lana Lang in the Superman-themed TV series Smallville. More recently, she's portraying a dual role on the program Beauty and the Beast on the CW network. And in fact, she just won a People's Choice Award for that work. But as fun as television is, Kristen also knows how to hit the books, and that's what she's done to get ready to battle for Canada Reads. The book that Kristen Crook will be defending is Intolerable, a memoir of extremes by Kamal Al-Sulaili. You may remember Kamal. He was a longtime theater critic for the Globe and Mail and other publications. But perhaps greater than any drama that he watched on stage is the one that unfolded in his own life. The title, Intolerable, can refer to any of the difficult situations that Kamal found himself facing in life. From his family's losing their fortune and status in Yemen, to realizing he was a gay man in an Arab country that would not accept him, to finding himself free in Canada, but politically and geographically cut off from his increasingly hardline Muslim family back at home. The resulting story shows how one life can include many contradictions side by side, and these barriers creating those conflicts must be overcome to move forward. We're very pleased to have Kamal Al-Sulaili with us via Skype from Hong Kong to talk about his book, Intolerable. Hello, Kamal. Thank you for joining us. And here to rehearse for her showdown at Canada Reads is award-winning Canadian actress and American TV and film star Kristen Crook. Please welcome her. What was it in the book Intolerable that spoke to you and made you want to champion it?
You know, it really, I mean, it's Kamal's personal telling of this story of being in the Middle East in a time where it was in great transition. And that transition is important for us to understand the realities that we exist in today. It was that and his coming out story. Just the difficulty but also joy of discovering who he is with a backdrop that was very, very challenging.
And what made you think of it? I mean, it's a great read, but why a great choice for Canada Reads as far as one book to break barriers?
Yeah, I think that the barrier, I've been doing a lot of research because I've been studying for Canada Reads. So we have a population in Canada of over 600,000 Arab people of Arab descent. And we have a population of over 1 million Muslim people. And polls have shown that our opinions of Muslims has gone down, that our trust for Muslims has gone down. And I think that this book helps us to understand how diverse this community is and how important it is to see people with more nuance and complexity. And Kamal really represents one aspect of that to me.
Let's get Kamal into the conversation here. Kamal, what has it been like for you knowing that your personal story, and for those people who haven't read it, you know, I mean, you go into great detail about your personal life, many aspects of it that are not just difficult, they're intimate ones as well. What is it like knowing that this would become part of a national conversation?
Torturous, yes. Believe it or not, I'm extremely proud of this, and I know it's very odd to say, having written sort of a revealing memoir. But one of the things I try to do in this book is just not to make it all about me. I try to situate the book in two other contexts. One is the family, and the other one is the larger Middle East situation, in sort of the whole Arab world, and also make it into a kind of a love letter to Toronto. So it helped that while I am the kind of the through line of the book, I'm not its sole focus. So that helped with the sort of dealing with the more personal or intimate parts.
What were the barriers that you yourself had to overcome?
Sort of in writing the book or in general?
No, in general, in your life, what were the biggest barriers that you had to overcome?
Well, two things in particular. Just being a gay man in a very homophobic and a very macho culture was a huge barrier. I grew up with images of gay men that were so loathsome and so hateful that it's kind of it's a miracle that I haven't that I haven't incorporated that or haven't absorbed that and become incredibly self-loathing. So that was one major barrier. The other barrier was the sort of the rise of Islamic dogma in the Middle East. I grew up, when I was born, there was a much more secular society, and as I got into my teenage year and my early adult years, the forces of a very conservative Islam started to take over and reinterpret everything and curtail freedom of speech, curtail freedom of thought, curtail free expression in general, and those were very difficult barriers.
You know, I also wondered whether, in fact, you're still getting over certain barriers. Just in writing this book, that alone took a lot of courage as well. And the fact that you have, in a big way, you've lost a family. You've lost your family.
I'm conscious not to sort of to make myself into any kind of a victim, because this book is also, I like to think that this book is also about triumphing over adversity. But at the heart of it is it's a kind of an elegy to a lost family that is still living, but they're sort of, in a way, they are lost to me, or I've lost connection with them. I can't even have a proper conversation with them. You know, we have nothing to talk about in those times, except talking about the weather. And you know, as I said in the book, like every time they see a snowstorm in Toronto, they think it was an apocalypse or something, and they call me to say how you're doing. But aside from that, I have no conversation. I've never told them anything about my private life. I've never shared details of it, and I don't know enough about their life now because we are so disconnected. And I feel for them because, I mean, they're going through the third civil war in 20 years. That's a lot for one family or any nation to go through.
The subtitle for this book is A Memoir of Extremes, and certainly your life, as you've written about it in the book, has been a series of opposites, or at least situations that have been at odds with each other, whether it went from being wealthy and then your family was poor, being gay, in this rigidly straight world, living among liberal Western values, while people that you love are on the other side of the world and they're conservative Muslims. Do you think that these kinds of extremes can be reconciled, or do we, in the end, have to make a choice and take a side?
It's funny you should say that, because just like a few minutes ago, I got an email from someone from the Middle East who was saying, like, what can I do? What can I? And I haven't responded yet, but my feeling is always to tell people to get out, because I don't think you could actually change a culture of 1 billion people all of a sudden. But I know that that's not a very practical thing for everyone. I had the privilege of education. I had the privilege of a certain sort of drive, and you can't keep telling people to uproot themselves and leave their culture and move to somewhere that's more welcoming. And I think we should invest more of our resources, as you know, when we talk about development and helping third world nations, into making lives better over there. And I mean, my family doesn't want to move to the West. That's not their fantasy. That's not their dream. They want a better life for themselves over there. As for, I mean, in general, I do think extremes can be bridged, but it takes a very long time. It's a generational thing. It will take. I mean, when Kristen was introducing the book and talking about the distrust of Muslim and Arabic communities, that's not going to change in a year or two. That's going to take, on both sides, including the Arab world, has to take ownership of some of the decisions it's made over the years.
Kristen, back to the main topic of Canada Reads, how do you think that this book will be able to break barriers?
I think that, as we've discussed, I think that not only the coming out story and the strength that Kamal has in that, I think really, for me, a big part of it was having a personal account of what was going on in that part of the world. I think we're quick to make judgments, to make blanket opinions about things, because I think it feels safer for us when we feel threatened. I think this book breaks through that barrier and makes us look at something more complexly, look at all of the details and all of the circumstances that led to us being where we're at.
You know, also, I think for me too, Kamal, I don't know if you felt this way, it also gave me insight into all the people around us who have connections to those worlds in many different ways. And so, yeah, but it sort of bridged, I guess. There was a bridge in that sense of there and here. Kamal, do you think? Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that I was listening to your conversation with Kim, and I mean, this book is also about Canada. This is the other thing I like to say. This is not just a book about the Middle East. This is a book about what a wonderful country Canada is, and how it's become home to millions of people. It's giving them a home, and our stories are actually the stories these are the stories of Canada, basically. This is not a book just about the Middle East. And in many ways, if I may just say, I mean, this is a love letter to Toronto of all places in Canada, because it really is. I mean, I miss it terribly. I've been away for a few months, and I sort of have this longing for it. I'm just dying to be home, not for the weather though. To skip the weather, and I just miss how at home I feel in Toronto and in Canada. Something I don't feel anywhere else in the world, including the Middle East.
No, we're happy to hear that. I hope you come home soon. Thank you so much, Kamal. Thank you very much.